There was a father and son who lived in Spain, who had a terrible argument one night, and they both said things to one another that they should not have said. And in the middle of the night, the son got up, packed his things, and left home. And the father got up in the morning and realized that his son had left, and he was distraught. And he went looking through Spain, looking in all of the places that his son should have been, trying to find his son. And finally, in desperation, he put an ad in the newspaper that said, "Dear Paco, I love you. Please meet me in front of the newspaper office on Saturday at noon. All is forgiven, Papa." And on Saturday, he went to the newspaper office in great anticipation, hoping to meet his son, and he found 800 Pacos waiting for their forgiving father. Forgiveness. It is a word that is incredibly important to us. We think about peace, about grace, about a chance to begin again. It's the kind of state that we want to live in. We want to be people of forgiveness. We want to be people that do not carry a grudge, who have no anger in our hearts towards somebody else. And we want to be people that we know do not have others out there who hold anger towards us. We want to be in this state of forgiveness. But how we get there is another question. All of us have had the opportunity in our lives to experience pain in one way or another. We have been mistreated, we have been lied to, we have been treated unfairly at different times in our lives. There are people in this room who have been abused emotionally, physically, sexually. There are people in this room who have had promises made to them that were broken or discarded or thrown away. There are people here who have every right to have expected to be loved by important people in their lives who have found themselves discarded or thrown away. And there are people who have perhaps found themselves the victims of violence or had their homes broken into or invaded in some way or another. In short, there is lots of pain in this room and in every church across the country. We all have those memories of ways in which we have been mistreated or hurt in some form or another. And so how we deal with that, what we do with that pain, says a lot about the people that we are and the people that we are becoming. Certainly, one of the common ways to deal with having been abused or mistreated is to retaliate, to pay it back in one form or another. I don't know if you remember the movie, 2005 movie, The Diary of a Mad Black Woman. It was, I see a couple smiles out there. It was kind of a strange film. Starring Tyler Perry. Tyler Perry's actually a man, but he plays this outrageous, crazy black woman in a series of movies. They are over the edge, over the top, no question about it. They're funny, but they're also kind of insightful from time to time. So The Diary of a Mad Black Woman begins with the story of Helen, who is married to Charles, who has been unfaithful to her for quite some time. Blatantly unfaithful. He has a mistress. He's had 2 children by this mistress, and at the beginning of the movie, he discards Helen, his wife. He kicks her out of the house and brings in his mistress and his 2 children to live there instead. And so Helen makes her way to her grandmother's house, to Medea's house, and they sit at the kitchen table, and they talk about what's happened, and Helen explains what's happened to her, and Medea sizes up the situation and makes some recommendations as to what should be done with Charles. Take a look at this clip.
What was you doing while he was working, honey?
Taking care of the house, cooking and cleaning.
Exactly. That sounds like a job to me. Cooking and cleaning. How long you do that?
18 years.
All right, okay. 18 years. Let's see how much she owed you. 18 years. You've been cooking, cleaning, having sex with him when he wanted. Was it good?
No.
Major deduction.
And I didn't tell you that he hit me.
Girl, that man owe you $64,283,974,020.82. And you need to get your money.
That'll never happen.
You want to bet? It can happen one of two ways, honey. You can get it from his checking account voluntarily or his insurance policy, involuntary manslaughter. Which one is going to be?
Medea?
I ain't finna have this. Come on.
What? Where are we going?
To your house.
Oh, no. The guard will never let us in.
I say, come on.
All right, so part of us kind of wants to admire Medea, who you know, adds it all up and says to her, this is what he owes you. You should go get what's owed to you. Stand up for yourself and go take what's your due. And in fact, in the scenes that will follow on this, they go to the house and do some pretty significant damage there. Most of us would not think about taking revenge or retaliating in that way, would we? I mean, we're Christian people. We're supposed to forgive, right? We're supposed to forgive. But I suspect that whereas we wouldn't be blatantly obvious about making somebody pay or punishing someone for having done us wrong, we seem to manage to find other ways to express our discontent, to punish someone. We're very good at the silent treatment. We stay silent when we're angry with somebody, and we make sure that they know that they're getting the silent treatment from us. Or we are good with just a cutting comment, something that just lets them know that in a very minor way that they've done us wrong and we know it. Or if we don't do those things, well, we may just choose to unload to a third party and let that third party know all about just how terrible this person is who has offended us and all of the ways in which we have been wronged. Real forgiveness, forgiveness from the heart, grace, the chance to begin again, a willingness to allow that person to live their life without owing us is hard to come by. Hard for us to get there. So how do we make our way into that kind of forgiveness? I think that the story from Luke's gospel has some real interesting insights for us today. Jesus went to the house of Simon the Pharisee, and he was having dinner with all of his disciples and people from the city, and they were lounging around tables and laughing and eating and drinking and telling stories, and this woman from the city comes in. Now that's code in the New Testament. It's very clear that the woman who comes in to this table from the city, who is a sinner, is a prostitute. Now she comes in. She clearly knows something of Jesus. In fact, she's had some sort of encounter with him because she is immediately moved greatly by being in his presence. And she finds her way to his feet and sits down by his feet and begins to weep, and the tears fall on his feet. And she suddenly begins to realize that she's wetting his feet. And she's, appalled by that. And so she takes her hair down and begins to dry his feet. Now you have to imagine the horror on the faces of the people eating dinner with them, because no righteous, honorable woman would take her hair down in public unless she's a harlot. And she's not only taking her hair down, she's wiping his feet with them. And then she goes on to start kissing his feet and anointing them with an oil that she has clearly bought with her earnings. The suggestive nature of what she is doing is remarkable. And Simon knows it immediately. He looks at what's happening and he says to himself, oh, this man, Jesus, he's either not very smart or he doesn't care that he's got a prostitute at his feet propositioning him. I'm certainly better than he is. And Jesus not only knows who she is and what she's doing, but he also knows what Simon thinks about it. And he begins to tell this little parable and says to him, there were these two debtors. They both owed money. One owed 50 denarii, which is about the equivalent of almost 2 months of work. The other one owes 500 denarii, which is worth over a year of work, a year and maybe 3 months. And the lender forgives them both. And he asks Simon, the Pharisee, which one is going to be more grateful? And of course it is the one who owes the more money. And he takes that piece of information and he drills his point home. And he begins to compare Simon to the woman. Simon has completely failed in his responsibilities as a host. He hasn't provided water for Jesus' feet to wash in. He hasn't kissed him on both cheeks, which was normal practice of hospitality. He hasn't anointed his head with oil. He's missed all of those things. But the woman in her love has provided everything for Jesus. And he forgives her. And he sends her on her way in peace. The story actually reminds me of a more modern story that was told to me several years ago when I went to visit the Ecumenical Night Ministry in Chicago. The night ministry in Chicago has been providing food and shelter and health services and spiritual guidance for vulnerable youth and adults since 1976. I visited them in the late 80s and learned about their ministry. The young people that they deal with in particular tend to be very troubled. Most of them have either run away from their homes because they were in abusive settings or were thrown away by their families. In fact, they said in the 80s that it was more common for youth to be thrown away than to run away. Coming to the city, many of them very young, some of them in their preteens, they had no other way to make a living than to give themselves to prostitution. So a lot of the young people were either involved in prostitution or were in drugs or were in gangs. And these young ministers were trying to find ways to connect with them. So I talked with this minister who walked the streets of Chicago at night, befriending these young people, trying to help them to find somebody to trust. And one of the stories that he told was about picking up a young woman who had been arrested for prostitution from jail. Her one phone call had been to him. And he went down to the jail and he paid her bail and he put her in the car and was taking her home. And on the way home, she was trying to express her gratitude to him. And she said to him, when we get back to the house, I'm going to give you a freebie. Now, the pastor immediately was torn with how he responded to her. Because obviously, he obviously could not take her up on her suggestion. He had no interest in taking advantage of her in that way. And yet she was trying to say thank you in the only way she knew how, offering him a gift, the only kind of gift that she had to offer. And so he didn't want to belittle her or embarrass her. And so he decided instead that he would play dumb. And he said, "Oh, hey, thanks, but you know, I don't drink coffee." And she looked at him quizzically and then laughed, knowing exactly what she had done and what he had done. In his suggestion to her, in his comment to her, he was suggesting to her that he couldn't imagine that she was offering to him what she had in fact just offered. And he was suggesting to her that she was better than that she was more than she thought that she was of herself. I think that's what Jesus does in the story that we read today in Luke. The woman comes in. She's trying to express her gratefulness to Jesus in the only way that she knows how, and her actions are completely inappropriate. She is offering things that we don't even want to think about. And Jesus takes her actions and makes them into something beautiful, something glorious, and honors what she has done in front of everybody so they all can see. He wraps her actions in grace and suggests to her that she can be more than she is, that he believes that she has the possibility to be better than this. I think that part of the way we get to forgiveness is when we understand that we are the woman in the story, that we fumble in our attempts to be grateful to God, to express our love for God, to love our neighbor, to forgive others, to be faithful. We fumble it again and again and again. And God takes our fumbled efforts and makes them into something beautiful and wraps us in grace and suggests that we can be more than we think we are. I can do an awful lot that I couldn't imagine I could do when somebody believes in me. And I can do even more when I understand that God believes in me. God believes in each one of you, each of us here. God whispers in our ear that we are his and that we can be more than we think we are, that he believes it's possible for us to be better than we believe, for us to forgive, to let go, and to love. Let us pray.